and I was trolling through the Advocate files and I came across this. The Ghost in the Park. The thing that intrigued locals most in '61 was the Mere Park ghost. Seems that courting couples had found the park ideal for cuddles after dark, a place for guys to take their chicks for some passion after flicks. Then one night, an ardent youth and willing maid canoodling in the sylvan glade were caught with knickers round their knees by an eerie spectre in the trees. The couple fled the scene in fright and cursed their interrupted night. By word of mouth the story spread and couples snogged elsewhere instead. The urban legend dogged the park and no one went there after dark. Time compounded people's fears. The mystery stayed unsolved for years. Investigators just could not fathom the riddle of the errant phantom. In time, the story chose to fade as folk forgot the haunted glade. The ghost that played on people's fears stayed hid for 47 years, till word of the nocturnal capers was resurrected in the papers. A writer, spurred on by his mother, revealed the ghost was his late brother. Buoyed up by his testosterone, he'd wander in the night alone. Left the house, he quit his bed and cycled to the park instead. There he would become the ghost to see who he could scare the most. Then turn off his torch, roll up his sheet, he'd quit the scene on silent feet. It's sad that Kevin's passed away. He was a prankster in his day. I haven't been there after dark. Does Kevin's spirit haunt the park? Oh.
Okay, now this is not my own work, this is a famous poet, Walter de la Mare. The Listeners by Walter de la Mare. Born 1873. They don't have his day of death here, but I presume he's had one by now. Is there anybody there, said the traveller, knocking on the moonlit door, and his horse in the silence chomped the grasses of the forest's ferny floor, and a bird flew up out of the turret above the traveller's head, and he smote upon the door again a second time. Is there anybody there? He said. But no one descended to the traveller. No head from the leaf-fringed sill leaned over and looked into his grey eyes where he stood, perplexed and still. But only a host of phantom listeners that dwelt in the lone house then stood listening in the quiet of the moonlight to that voice from the world of men, stood thronging the faint moonbeam on the dark stair that goes down to the empty hall, hearkening in an air stirred and shaken by the lonely traveller's call. And he felt in his heart their strangeness, their stillness answering his cry, while his horse moved, cropping the dark turf neath the starred and leafy sky. For suddenly he smote upon the door even louder and lifted his head. Tell them that I came, and no one answered, that I kept my word, he said. Never the least stir made the listeners, though every word he spake fell echoing through the shadowiness of the still house from the one man left awake. Aye, they heard his foot upon the stirrup and the sound of iron on stone, and how the silence surged softly backward when the plunging hooves were gone.
This is quite a long one. You've probably gathered by now that I am English. I come from the north of England, and of course, family tend to come over here to see us. And this is a poem about my sister's holiday. My sister came over from England. Her husband came with her as well. And now that they've gone back to Yorkshire, they've got lots of stories to tell. At first, they stayed with us in Milford and paddled a bit in the sea. But then they went up to Northland because they fancied a bit of a spree. They went up to see Cape Reinga, where Pacific and Tasman both meet. They looked at the foaming white water and thought it were really a treat. Then Buster come back down to coastline. They thought 90 Mile Beach was right grand, because instead of wall-to-wall people, they were staring at wall-to-wall sand. They saw Russell and then Bay of Islands and found there was naught else to do but drive from one place to another to see a magnificent view. Back in Auckland, they tried Kelly Tarleton's, all things underwater to view. Then a stop at Microworld's insects and things, all close up and magnified too. Then we took them to see Coromandel. The weather forecast had been fine. A great big high pressure was over the land, but the sun had forgotten to shine. Coromandel looked really quite magic, with the mist rolling over the hill. But it rained 2.5 inches just in one night, and next day it was coming down still. So instead, we tried West Coast beaches. At Watipu, we were all set for a photograph with a big wave behind, but it rolled in and left us all wet. To the car park, we retraced our footsteps, and Geoffrey seemed in a big haste and striding out fine till he stepped in a bog and the water came up to his waist. Well, I think someone spoke to the weatherman because he wanted to make them feel good. What with the wind and the rain, we said, what a shame. But to them, it felt just as it should. At last, Christmas Day was upon us. They thought it a strange one by heck, when they ate a roast dinner and plum pudding too, with the sweat trickling all down their neck. For the rest of their stay in New Zealand, which lasted another 6 weeks, we took a nice trip round both islands to look at the valleys and peaks. Milford Sound was simply amazing. We had a remarkable day. And what with Kias on car and seals basking on rocks, even dolphins put on a display. The sun seemed to shine every minute, and my sister's tan was a real treat. She said when she got back, she'd turn up the heat. She'd invite all her friends and make sure that she turned up the heat. When their holiday finally ended and they were all packed to go home, they said, one thing for sure, we're both coming back because we think New Zealand's God's own.